All right, folks. Actually, hold on. Let me kill my maintenance background here since we're actually up and running. All right, so we are up and running. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the August event for the Atlanta Kubernetes Meetup. We have, I don't know if we can even call it the Atlanta Meetup at this point. We've got so many people joining us. Now, internationally, we have an international speaker, so we're all grown up at this point. But either way, thank you for coming and joining us. The first thing we always like to do is to open up the floor to call out and ask who in the community is hiring. If there are any roles that are kind of relevant in the cloud native space that might be relevant for people watching or for people checking out the recording on YouTube later. If you're here on mic, go ahead and feel free to unmute and call it out. Otherwise, put it in chat. And what I'll do is I'll read out loud after the news. Please make sure to include contact information for a way to contact somebody at the company or to be able to get any information that might be useful to a person interested in the role. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to my co-host Joe for the news.
All right, give me just a second here, folks, to get everything lined up, and we'll be off to the races. Actually, Alex, could you give me the privilege to share my screen? Oh, no, got it. Cool. All right, so in this section, this is typically when we review kind of what's going on in with the Kubernetes project itself, as well as the general Kubernetes community at large. We're lucky today, Kubernetes 1.19 release was done today. So after being pushed a little bit with some flaky tests and such, it's out there, got a link to the release notes in here. Some of the features of note that we want to go through, some of these we've talked about in the past, but just kind of recap here, put together some links to make it easy for you to find this stuff. There's some new features around servicing deprecation warnings within kubectl. So when you come across APIs that have been deprecated, those messages will be sent right to you in a direct feedback loop. So should be a little more obvious. This is another interesting one. No more permanent betas for APIs. So I'm looking at you, Mr. Ingress. Ingress has been at beta just about since it came out, and it's almost a laughing joke within the Kubernetes community. But they're putting some kind of thresholds around what the beta classification can be, how long it will be out there for, and some rules around that to prevent that from happening in the future. So you can read more about that if you want to. And on that note, we can finally celebrate that Ingress is now no longer beta and has graduated to generally available. So take a moment to applaud that effort. Most people that use Kubernetes use Ingress. It's been a big tool, cornerstone to the project and the community at large and how people use Kubernetes. So really good to see all the hard work that's gone into that, reach a GA status finally. Debugging tools, this is one of my favorite pieces, and I know we've covered some details on this in the past, but building in some debugging tools into kubectl itself to allow you to more easily troubleshoot things with running pods, as well as nodes themselves. Won't go into any more details there, but check out that link. That's really, really cool stuff. And then another big one that is kind of a transparent change underneath the covers that most people probably won't notice unless you're running very large Kubernetes environments is a change to where endpoint slices, which is a new API that replaces the traditional endpoints API. This allows, it's going to be owned by default now 1.19 and going forward. And this just solves some of the underlying scalability problems that have plagued the Kubernetes project in the past. So if you're running really large clusters, you're probably already aware of this and know all about it, but check that out. General community news. So this was a light month overall from what I saw, but I did come across a few things that were pretty interesting. So one thing in general that I want to call out here is everybody looks at Kubernetes/Kubernetes on GitHub and sees stuff going on in there and whatnot. But you should really start to take a look at the projects going on in Kubernetes-SIGs in that GitHub org. There's a lot of really cool side projects that maybe never make their way into the Kubernetes core code base, but there's lots of neat ideas going around there, lots of different POCs and concepts that come about. And one of them that really caught my eye was this hierarchical namespaces. So I should already have this open. So if you've been working with Kubernetes for a while, and you're at a big company with lots of development teams and stuff like that, chances are you've come across like the multi-tenancy concepts with Kubernetes before. And how do you separate things off and have these like logical boundaries for both access as well as resource allocations and things of that nature. And in some cases, you may have found that the current model with namespace only is that like boundary level is lacking a little bit. And so when you have teams that say manage multiple applications and you want to be able to separate those logically and have them in different namespaces, but you still want to track all that back to like one type of identity or one type of quota or something like that, that's where the hierarchical namespace concept comes in. So it has this relationship of like an owning namespace. You can have sub namespaces, lots of other cool features that go into this. Highly recommend you go and read through this. This is one that I could see, you know, getting pretty, that might make its way into the core code base at some point in time. So check that out. A couple other links that go into some of the concepts and stuff there. So this is fun. Any old school like Unix, Linux people, you know, one of the things of like, you know, making your product leak status was, can you run Linux on it? You know, everybody jokes about running Linux on the toasters, but in my opinion, the kind of second phase of that is, can you run Quake on it? And so this is something that popped up that I thought was pretty funny, is Quake Cube. So this is a packaged version to be able to run Quake JS on top of Kubernetes. So if you're into video games and stuff like that, or just want a good laugh, check that out. I thought it was pretty cool. So speaking of the Kubernetes SIG stuff, the Kubernetes application API. This was another interesting one that caught my eye because this is a problem that has been coming up time and time again with my day job, which is Kubernetes deployments and stateful sets and stuff like that are all great, well and good, and they solve lots of problems. They're nice abstractions. But you can end up with these very complex applications that have like multiple pieces that all need to talk together, and being able to address those as like one entity but still keep them loosely coupled has been really important to like our business. And talking with other people in the community, it's important at large too. So this is kind of an additional API that can provide not necessarily ownership, but relationships with like dependencies and stuff like that, where you can track how all these loosely coupled components are related to one another. And you can, it's all built around being able to provide a common interface for how to display applications within various Kubernetes tools. So everybody that builds a dashboard for Kubernetes, this, that, or the other, these are common pieces of information that I think will become a kind of standard interface over time of how that information gets displayed. There is an example out here that is based around like a WordPress application. So if you go through here and see that, like, I think they did a pretty cool job of using like label selectors to group various Kubernetes resources and show that they have a relationship with one another. There's tons of metadata that you can add about that application, whether it's keywords, links to like who owns it, how to run it, what the triage support information is. You know, obviously version is going to be important here, as well as a generic description and, you know, icons make stuff look pretty in GUIs, and then being able to list both maintainers and owners for something. So this is pretty cool. Something else to keep an eye on. Be interested to have some conversations with people to see if they have anything else going on that is like similar to that, or how they're solving those problems within their own orgs. And then there's been a couple things floating around the internet over time of like what happens when, and I actually just saw some Twitter threads going on about this recently around like what happens when I put an address into a browser and I click enter, or what happens when I send an email. These are common questions that get used in interviews that kind of they're purposefully generic and vague to kind of show like what level of detail you're comfortable with and whatnot. And somebody put together one of these for Kubernetes. So this is the what happens when Kubernetes edition. And the example that they have is just this kubectl run nginx with replicas 3. And this goes through in a pretty amazing amount of detail of what actually happens under the cover from the client-side calls with client Go libraries inside kubectl, all the way into what happens on the server side to when things eventually get wrapped up and persisted in etcd, to the initializers, the control loops, the kubelet, the container runtime. It's pretty interesting information if you've ever wanted to like really dive deeper into Kubernetes internals and like what happens when. This is a pretty good article to read through on that. And with that being said, that is it for this month in Kubernetes. Beautiful.
All right, we have got quite a number of opportunities listed in chat. I'm going to run through these really quick. I want to call out ahead of time and say these will be posted with the show notes on HackMD, so you can find all these details. I'll also repost with the details, including links and people's email addresses into the chat here momentarily, so you don't have to go hunt us down afterwards to find this. So Sysdig is hiring a number of positions. I will post a link to their jobs page. You can reach out to Dan Papandreas here. It's pop@sysdig.com. He's also right here. So feel free to send a message to him if you want to chat about it. I'm sure he'd be happy to respond. OpsMX is also hiring. Marky's representing them. He's also here, and I'm sure happy to talk to you about it. Square is hiring right now. They are working to convert to Kubernetes from some homegrown deployment tooling. You can reach out to Aaron Goldsmith. His email's agoldsmith@squareup.com. Again, I'll post all these. Vesima, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Vesima Networks is hiring. They're doing hyperconverged storage and a video platform running on Docker and moving to Kubernetes soon. You can email jeremy.pullen, that's Pullen, at Vesima, Becima.com. Talk is also hiring. Looks like they're hiring full stack and front end developers. You can check it out at explorertalk.com. Looks like it's Java and JavaScript running on GKE. That's a remote friendly company coming out of Chicago. And you can email Dylan at talkhq.com. Real Theory is hiring. They're very flexible about when you work, where you work from. They're only looking for small investments, about 5 hours a week, looking for .NET Core, Golang, AWS, and Kubernetes experience. You can email amazing@realtheory.io. NCR is also hiring. It looks like they're hiring a cloud native developer. I'm actually super interested to hear what that is. They got a couple of listings for it. And you can contact Rashed Kamal. That's Rashed, RASHED.Kamal, KAMAL @ncr.com for information. And it looks like we actually still have some coming in. Looks like there is a container security engineer position open at Flamingo Security, Flamingo Sec. So you can contact@flamingosec.com. I'll repost that again in a minute. And that is all for hiring. Looks like things are really booming in the cloud native space. How about that? All right, cool. Joe, if you want to go ahead and kick us off, buddy, I think we're ready.
All right, so we've got two great speakers today. The first we have is Mr. Steve Wade here from Mettle. Steve is pretty widely known in and around the Kubernetes community. He's done lots of things and been involved in lots of different things. He comes to us from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean today, and he's going to be talking about the Gitops journey that Mettle's gone through. With that being said, thanks for coming and speaking with us, Steve. I'll turn it over to you.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Can everyone see my screen okay? Cool. So I'm going to spend the next kind of 35 to 40 minutes talking about the journey that Mettle has been on the last kind of 18 months to 2 years, specifically around Gitops and how it's enabled us to really drive the work that we're doing at Mettle forward. So Joe gave the introduction. My name's Steve Wade. I'm an independent consultant at Mettle, and I'm currently the platform lead there. Contributed to a number of projects. One of those we're going to talk about today, which is Flux. This is kind of a high level talk. A lot of the kind of detail I've blogged about over on Medium. So go check that out if you want a little bit more of a deeper understanding. So I think it's probably best that I set the scene of what Mettle is, considering I'm just some randomer from London talking and you guys are all over in the US. So Mettle is a business bank that is completely online. So I know that Monzo have just kind of come over to the US. So we have no kind of bricks and mortar. You can't go into a Mettle branch and talk to somebody. It's all done from a mobile app. So I want to kind of start off with this quote from Kelsey that says, once you've found success, your next goal should be helping others. So I kind of want to replace that and change it to a pattern that works. If you notice, I didn't put the number of likes and retweets because it's nowhere near as many as Kelsey's. So, wow, this is like skipped a load of slides. So I want to start today talking about this unanswerable question, this question that I got asked a couple of months into my tenure at Mettle, and this awkward position that I was kind of put in because I didn't have an answer to it. Then I want to talk about the redesign process. So we kind of, you know, got in front of the whiteboard and essentially started again, and some of those decisions that we made. Then we'll talk about the repositories and how they are structured and how they're enabling each area of the business to innovate. Touch a little bit on continuous delivery, what that looks like, and then kind of how it all comes together at the end. So obviously Mettle is a business bank. So when I think of banking, I think of people like this, just like guys in suits with gold watches. But really what we're talking about is a lot of red tape. So Mettle is a venture inside of a larger bank here in England. And the reason why we got kickstarted was essentially to show that bank a new way of working, to remove that red tape or kind of codify the compliance and show them that it is possible to move faster than a kind of 2-week release cadence that requires you to go to change approval boards. But because of that, we got a lot of this. So we had a lot of eyes on us all the time. Some of that was people being interested, but also some of that was people being envious of us, right? And then from that, this was me having to stand up in front of large numbers of kind of CTOs and executive boards, explaining what things like Kubernetes were, explaining how it's kind of enabling us and why you know, we were able to use it and they weren't. One of the questions that I actually got asked at the beginning was, how long would it take you to rebuild an environment? And my answer was kind of this: I didn't really know. But then why would I need to know, right? Kubernetes is there, does desired state reconciliation. I lose a node, a new one's going to come up. You know, I'm going to lose a workload, another one's going to replace it. Kubernetes is going to do that from the scheduler. But working in banking, they love like kind of DR, right? And they love to think of the worst possible incident that you could have. So like, you know, the whole of Amazon goes down or something like that. So we were just talking here about, you know, AZs and regions and stuff like that. And I didn't have an answer, and this made me feel really uncomfortable as a professional person that's in a leadership position inside a new startup. I didn't feel comfortable with this, and I said, you know what, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to give you an answer, and I'm actually going to go better than that. I'm going to record it and prove to you that it is possible in the time that I'm saying. So we essentially went on this big rebuild. And we started with a mission statement, because any of you that are familiar with mission statements, this gets business buy-in if you label it with buzzwords. So we wanted to provide an easily recoverable, consistent platform with clear ownership and, most importantly, self-service to developers. So we've got some buzzwords in there. So the business were already pretty happy with this. We just needed to essentially prove that it was possible. So we run out of Amazon, and then essentially we run Kubernetes on top, and then we just want to deploy the Mettle workloads. Relatively simple, right? In theory. The first question that we had is we needed to make this decision of whether we wanted to go with Flux or Argo. Both of them are great, but the developers were already leveraging concourse pipelines. And what I wanted to do is get them to be bought into this model. So if I didn't have to tell them to drastically change their CI/CD pipelines, and we kind of hooked Gitops in as a way for them to deploy rather than having to re-architect these pipelines, I knew that I was going to get buy-in almost immediately. You know, developers don't like to change things. They just like to keep on iterating, right, and deliver new features. So the great thing about Flux and Gitops, I'm going to talk about Flux specifically here, is that it allows us to be able to do two things, right? We're going to be able to sync from a repository, and then we've also got this ability to go and look for new images. So we're going to kind of get continuous deployment from that image poll that you'll see up at the top there. And then we've got this kind of consistent reconciliation loop that's happening with our Git repos. And we have a number of them. The one thing that caused us a lot of contention was the bottom left, because in the old world that we know as Platform V1, and we were building out Platform V2, the gentleman that was there before me thought it was absolutely fine to allow all the developers to run kubectl apply. Yep, you heard that, all of them in production. And while they're at it, they can exec into pods, they can port forward, they can do basically everything. So yeah, I can see your face, Bob. I was the same. So that was the main stumbling block. The main stumbling block, right, was the people problems. The tech is actually trivial and relatively straightforward. It was explaining to them the reasons why that wasn't a good idea. And we looped back to that unanswerable question and were showing them how what they were doing was making that much, much more difficult. I had no idea of what they were running. So the main thing is, from this, we've got this sync. So the sync piece is going to give us this easily recoverable, right? If we get this pattern right, we can sync from our repositories and we'll get back to where we were. Now we have to come onto the consistent piece. So I'm going to talk about this kind of 3-character environment prefix, and it flows all the way through how the whole platform works. Starts with DNS. It goes all the way through all of our GitHub repository structures, which I'm going to come on to shortly. And then it also is used extensively within our microservice image tags. So kind of spoiler, to take an image from dev to staging, you retag it with STG rather than DEV, and then Flux is going to be looking for that new image tag. So the next thing is clear ownership. So one of the issues that we had with V1 is that the platform team were always the blockers, right? We were never the enablers. So, you know, they couldn't deploy their app, even if they misconfigured it, it's the platform team. You know, my CI is broken. Well, that's yours, but you know, the platform's broken. So, you know, CI runs on the platform. So it must be the platform team. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we did out the gate is get this ownership model right. You know, I want the developers to be responsible for shipping features to customers. And as long as we get the abstraction right, they should be able to deploy as many microservices they want with, you know, with the guardrails in place so they don't do anything silly. And we can get out of their way and we can concentrate on the things that stabilize the platform, and they can work on things that bring value to our customers. So our repositories are structured in a number of different ways, but I kind of want to stop for a second and talk about the Helm operator with inside Flux. So V1 of the platform, they were familiar with Helm charts. They had a Helm chart per microservice. They loved to copy and paste. They copied and pasted the wrong things. We had a lot of wrong things in a lot of places. No consistency, no security context. You know, we're a bank, we're allowing, you know, they had containers running as root. You know, if we got audited, we were just going to get crucified. But they understood how Helm charts worked, right? The premise of them. They would have different values files for different environments, and they understood what they were doing. So what we did is we created what was called a backend chart, because all of the applications essentially looked the same. They were either producers or consumers of messages to Kafka. So we templatized this. You know, not everybody inside the engineering team is a Kubernetes guru, and neither do they need to be. So, you know, the people that knew Kubernetes sat down and wrote this chart. We documented the values file, you know, extensively, and that is their interface for onboarding new microservices. We don't want hundreds and hundreds of different Helm charts. We want that consistency, and we're going to take that off of their hands. So inside of Git, they specify Helm releases. And for those of you who don't know what a Helm release is, it essentially looks like this. So you specify a chart that you want to use at a specific version, and then underneath that, you specify values. And imagine that as your kind of values.yaml. We're essentially taking the abstraction one level higher. With Helm releases, we have these two annotations. So we can say automated true, and that's telling Flux, I'm going to allow you to go and look for new image tags. And then the next one is the tag that it's looking for. So in this example, it's doing semantic versioning, and it's looking for any tag that starts with 3.0. So if we deployed or uploaded or pushed a new image tag of 3.0.1, Flux would see that, it would deploy it, and then it would finally write that back to Git. So everything that we build upon starts from Kubernetes resources. So Kubernetes resources, if you kind of think of it as platform engineering resources, or the resources that kind of kickstart everything working. So in here, we've got things like the monitoring stack, the logging stack, all of the role-based access control for all of the developers so that they can't do everything that I've just told you they could do before. So we're heavy users of Kustomize. We do deploy as Helm releases, but we use Kustomize to keep this repo as dry as we possibly can. And you'll see here that inside of the Kustomize directory, we have an underscore modules directory. So that's kind of like a pick and mix. You know, you can choose what products and what namespaces get deployed. And then you'll see these 3 character environment prefixes. So dev is DEV as an example. The 2-letter ones are personal sandboxes for the platform team, so SW, Steve Wade. And the only one that breaks the 3-character prefix is tools, because I called that TLS and everybody got very confused for obvious reasons. So inside modules, number of different directories, kind of an a la carte menu that you can choose whether you want to deploy them or not into a given environment. So prime example, in our tools environment, we have Concourse. So Concourse is an option that can be chosen. It's not going to be in every single environment. Something like Cluster is going to end up in every single environment, no matter what we want. So I'm going to take kind of Istio as an example. So in Dev, we are essentially patching the existing top-level Helm release that's in the modules directory with the Dev specific configuration. And for us, it's really just ingress host names 9 times out of 10. So a lot of the kind of cruft or YAML essentially is in that modules directory. And these are just the diffs. So it's relatively easy for us to see. So that's going to kind of get us out the gate. The next step is, what the heck are we going to do with secrets? And we went round and round the houses with this. Do we use Vault? Blah, 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 blah. For us to use Vault, we need to change the application.
Real quick, Maddie's asked in chat if you have an opinion on when you think, or how long you think it'll take for Flux 2.0 to become stable, and specifically points out there's some features that he thinks look rad in Flux 2.0.
Yeah, so I've been working a little bit with the Flux team, done a few kind of POCs. The one thing that's not there yet that I think will take it into a position whereby it's aligned with Flux v1 is going to be the image controller. So the image controller being the thing that looks for new images and reconciles those. Once that's there, it will be in a position whereby it will be aligned with v1, and then they'll probably cut an initial release for kind of alignment, and then they'll push on forward for the new things they want to work on. It's not far off. I couldn't give you dates. I would say easily before the end of this year, easily.
Steve, one more question from the audience so far is, how is this different from the Gitops toolkit?
The Gitops toolkit is Flux v2.
Okay.
Currently at Mettle, we're using Flux v1 because we need that image controller that's currently under development for the Gitops toolkit. So yeah, back to where we were. So we had this option of, from secrets management, do we use Vault or, do we use something else? For us to use Vault, we had to change the way the applications worked. Yeah, we could have a sidecar that, authenticates with Vault and pulls the secrets down. But the developers weren't expecting, though, in their applications, weren't expecting secrets to be in files, essentially. So for us to be able to do this migration successfully and relatively, quickly, I didn't want to make application changes. I just wanted to change the way they deployed. Vault was Vault is an afterthought after we've initially got out the gate. So for us to do secrets, we essentially leverage sealed secrets, and this worked really well for us. So for those of you not familiar with sealed secrets, inside Kubernetes runs the sealed secret controller with a private key. Inside Git, we have a corresponding public key. You seal a normal Kubernetes secret with your public key, and you turn it into a sealed secret. And then we deploy that or sync that with Flux. And then the sealed secrets controller with the corresponding private key, quote unquote, unseals it into Kubernetes secrets that we all know and love, questionably, in today's world. But what this has allowed us to be able to do now is solely put this in the security domain, right? The security guys and girl is responsible for this repository. They are responsible for how we get secrets into the cluster. The platform team are responsible for how do we get the private keys, how do we get the public keys, how do we deal with rotation, et cetera, et cetera. But the creation of these is handled by the security team. So you're kind of seeing how we're splitting up the separation of concerns here. Sealed secrets, very similar. The sealed secrets directory has that 3-letter environment prefix again for dev. It's flowing all the way through these repositories. Cadence releases Mettle are the Mettle workloads, the thing that turns a quote unquote just normal cluster with good observability and good monitoring into something that's actually running Mettle workloads. Again, heavy users of Kustomize, but now what you'll notice is they only have base and those 3-character environment prefixes because they don't need the personal environments that we're running. So the base directory contains the non-specific environment configuration. So base, again, a la carte menu that they have the option to deploy into an environment. This is loosely around namespaces. I say loosely because it's not a complete one-to-one mapping. Something like Ditto is our testing tool that allows our testers to be able to create transactions. So that doesn't need to be everywhere. So let's take the account balance microservice in EV. EV is one of our products at Mettle in base. And there's a couple of things that you'll note here. One is that it's leveraging the backend chart, but you'll notice there's no chart version here. And that's because the chart version ties it to the Kubernetes version that we're currently running. So if you remember the 1.16 release, they deprecated all the APIs. So for 1.14 and 1.15, we were using charts 1.x. And then when we rolled 1.16 through, we moved those to 2.x backend charts. And that's how we knew that these Helm releases were ready to be onboarded onto a 1.16 cluster. So that's why they're not in the base. The other thing you'll notice as well, no image tag, because again, the image tag is tied to the environment. That's going to be environment specific configuration. The other thing you'll notice is on line 5 here, we're setting the automated to true. So we're going to do continuous delivery of all of our microservices into all environments. And we'll talk about how we do continuous, how we enable that in such a way that we allow continuous deployment of all microservices through our environments. So then environment specific configuration, and you'll see here in dev, we've chosen a number of different options from our base directory. And then if we look at the same account balance microservice in dev, you'll see now that we have this glob. And this glob is looking for all images that start dev-star. Doesn't really take a rocket scientist to work out what staging is going to look like. Just replace dev with stg. Looking at the image tag, and then finally the chart version at the bottom. So a lot of the heavy lifting is done in base. Again, very small diffs for them to be able to deploy their changes into different environments. The important thing to note here is this Flux patch. So this Flux patch, its job is every time Flux sees a new image and deploys it, it writes it back to Git so that we've got a history of all the changes that have ever been made. Right, I had to put this picture in, this GIF in, sorry. Respect the royal family. But that's pretty awesome, right? We never had this before. Before, the CI machine was seen as the thing that really, the single source of truth. the thing that really knew what was going on in the cluster. Or if it wasn't that, it was other people's personal laptops, if they still had their history. So great, Steve, you've got a couple of repositories, well done, you've configured them and you've got this 3-character environment prefix, but how the hell do you actually ship features? So I want to start with kind of microservice pipelines. So developers use Concourse, they've used Concourse in V1, there's no reason why they can't use it in V2. They perform a Docker build. I've kind of cut out some craft for obvious reasons. And they essentially build a tag with dev-commit SHA. And then they push that to our image repository, which is GCR. And that new tag exists in the image registry. Meanwhile, Flux is constantly looking for new image tags, right? We've got it set to like every minute. It sees that new image tag. It patches the Helm release. And the thing here is it patches it locally to the pod itself. So it's got all of the YAML files essentially that it needs. It patches it. It performs a kubectl apply from the pod to the Kubernetes API, and then it commits those changes back to Git. Meanwhile, in Concourse, we have this wait for update. And because we've got that backend chart and we've got labeling consistency, this is essentially generic. It essentially says, have I got a replica set that has the label app name and app version? And the app version is the version of the image tag that you've just uploaded. Yes, I have. Okay, then now do kubectl rollout status and make sure that the status is successful. Once you've got that far, we've essentially deployed, perform your testing. To go to staging, you essentially re-tag the same image with stg-long commit SHA rather than dev. Rinse and repeat all the way to production through all of the environments. Thing about this, we've made all of the pipelines very generic. The developers are now focusing on the thing that's important to them, right? The CI portion. How do I get confidence to move that microservice version from dev to staging, from staging for production? Right, we've got this templatized way of being able to, configure those Helm releases. They understand that. Now they are responsible for the thing that they really care about, which is that confidence question. We're going to handle the deployment for them, and we've got this kind of generic, wait for update that they just essentially run at each stage. So that's for kind of microservice changes. But then if we talk about Kubernetes manifest changes, it's slightly different. So we use Circle CI for this because there's no need for us to use Concourse because we're not doing any integration tests here or anything like that. So we run conf test, and we've got a set of kind of deprecation checks. So we are running Kubernetes 117 right now, but we are running deprecation checks against 120. So we can go all the way to 120 if we need to, and we'll know that the manifests that we currently deploy are going to work. We've got a couple of other ones in there that are very specific to Mettle, but essentially this is going to help us get more confidence by the time that we hit the API. Kubeval, if you're not familiar with Kubeval, essentially is a linting tool that validates against the upstream JSON schema. So we're running 117. We run kubeval in strict mode against Kubernetes 117. Again, it's just more confidence. These are essentially both run against our Helm charts that we have. And then the final one is HRval from Stefan Prodan at Weaveworks. So what this does is it essentially takes your Helm release, as in the Helm release YAML that Flux understands, goes and gets the chart that you've referenced at the version that you've specified, and does a Helm template using that plus the values file that you've specified, or the values that you specified in your Helm release, and then runs kubeval against it. But we took it a little bit further, and we also run the conf test against it as well. So by the time we've done all this, and we do this on every commit, we get quite a high level of confidence that by the time the API server gets it, it's going to at least deploy. And then the issue is hopefully going to most likely be the application itself rather than the configuration that's getting deployed. So that's fantastic, right? We've got some CI, you've got some linting, you've got a way of, actually being able to deploy microservices through your environments. But Steve, you haven't really, showed me the way that you're going to be able to answer this question. And I think this is where the magic kind of really happens. So how the cluster comes up is critical to how we answer this question. So again, we're running in Amazon, and then on top of that, we run Kubernetes. And we run Kubernetes with Bootkube. And this was kind of a conscious choice, because with Bootkube, we can manipulate the manifests that we see as, inverted commas, the vanilla cluster. So kind of spoiler alert, inside Bootkube, we have a Flux deployment. And that Flux deployment points straight at Kubernetes resources. Because if you remember what I was saying before, Kubernetes resources is the starting point. That's where everything starts from. When we define that, we are essentially providing it with a Git URL, but most importantly, a path. And that path is the 3-character environment prefix. So if we're spinning up a dev cluster, we need to be pointing at the dev directory for Kubernetes resources. Any of you that were eagle-eyed would have noticed that there was a specific directory in here, which I kind of glossed over earlier. And that one is the Flux directory. So if you think back now, clusters come up, Kubernetes resources has come up, and it's now starting to reconcile. It's also going to reconcile another set of Flux instances. So the Bootstrap directory is essentially, you can get Flux to upgrade Flux. So that Bootstrap Flux is essentially the Flux that gets deployed as part of Bootkube. Then we have the engineering Flux for the Mettle workloads. Secrets is pretty self-explanatory. And then we have a number of other ones for kind of Istio resources and so forth and such like. So Kubernetes resources Flux comes up. Then the K8 releases Mettle Flux comes up. That's going to deploy the Mettle workloads. Secrets for secrets, Kafka topics for Kafka topics, right? It's kind of getting a bit monotonous now. Network policies for Calico network policies, Istio resources for Istio resources. And they all come up at some directory / environment prefix, right? And if this environment prefix gets broken, the whole thing falls over. But again, we've got CI in place so that you can't do that. So can we answer the question now, right? The question that I got asked 18 months ago that I shrugged my shoulders to and, kind of just glossed over the fact that I didn't really have an answer. Like, can I answer it now? Yes, I can. I can answer it, and we can stand up a whole new environment in a DR incident in 25 minutes from basically nothing. And I remember when I was on a conference call and he was like, yeah, that's really good, isn't it? Yeah, like 25 minutes. Like it takes us actually like hours and hours and maybe days, and in some cases weeks. And I was like, you know what? I told you that I was going to record it. So we actually recorded the whole thing from, no account in Amazon all the way up to a fully working thing with a handset that could connect. And it essentially blew their mind. And rather than them being envy of us now, they are now implementing what we implemented at Mettle back at the bigger bank. They're taking a lot of the learnings that we've done. Essentially now the cluster has become kind of like a PaaS, and it's so cookie cutter that they're now running it within their different departments, but just pointing at different Git repos.
Hey, Steve.
Hey.
Yeah, a question from the chat here is, what kind of issues did you run into when moving devs from the traditional kubectl apply model to the Gitops model?
What problems did we experience? A lot. It's mostly, honestly, hearts and minds, right? There was a number of people that were in there that were really keen. They saw the value. The reason why we did it with Kubernetes resources first, before we touched their workloads, is I wanted to show them the power, right? I wanted to delete a whole entire cluster and I want to stand it back up again. And you browse to the Prometheus URL and you see Prometheus. You browse to the Grafana URL and you see Grafana with all the dashboards that were there previously. And then it was a case of working with the teams and onboarding their microservices, right? Guys, you don't have to be responsible for that Helm chart that you don't really understand anymore. We've documented the backend chart for you. Let's work with you and onboard 2 of your microservices. You write the documentation that you need. We take a step back. You continue. It was an iterative process, and the migration from V1 to V2 took longer than I was expecting, but it was mainly because it was a case of encouraging people that this was the right way to do things. You know, it was the hearts and minds. And if we're talking numbers, last month, 220 deploys to production, 220 were successful, right? It works. It took time to get there, but it works. And a new project kicked off about 3 weeks ago now. They've deployed 15 microservices all the way from dev to production. They came to my team once to create a namespace, and that was about it. We didn't hear anything from them again. So we are out their way. They are in a position whereby they can innovate. Every party wins, right? We have had, since I joined, monthly meetings with the engineers, and it was literally hell. It was like a roasting every time I went to this meeting. And now they don't have anything to say, right? They just say, why didn't we do this earlier? You know, and now we are focusing on, in the platform team, the things that we should be focusing on, and they're focusing on kind of bringing business value.
We've got another question from Michael asking, do you have to have GitHub Enterprise to do this?
No, you can use any Git repo. You could use Bitbucket, you could use on-premise GitHub, you could use github.com. As long as you can have, you know, a deploy key or an SSH key that can establish a connection back to your repository, it can be wherever you want. So I'm kind of leave these links on screen. First set of links are the tools that we've talked about, so Customize Flux and the Helm operator. Bottom links are deprecation policies, in case you wanted to know what I was talking about. An example of Gitops with Customize that kind of greatly simplifies what we've done at Mettle and distills it down to like the most basic implementation that I could think of. And then a link to all the kind of blog posts that talk about this in much more depth than I could do in kind of 30 minutes. Yeah, we're not going to do that because it's too late for me to do a demo. I don't trust myself. That's it from me.
We've got one more question again from Michael saying, my organization is just starting to look at using Kubernetes. Would you recommend this approach for new organizations?
Yeah, I think I would, right? But you've got to get familiar with the tooling before you embed, you know, a higher level abstraction. Get familiar with Helm, understand how it works. Get yourself in the weeds a little bit with Customize and how that works. All Flux is really doing at a kind of high level is removing your kubectl apply and doing it for you, right? And it's got some other features. Essentially, it writes back to Git and it's giving you your history and audit trail, and then it's got this kind of image polar. But everything that you can do locally, it's essentially doing. There is one massive gotcha, and I remember Duffy and I talked about it at TGIK. The customized version that Flux uses is not the one that comes with kubectl. I'll save you your pain now. Just go straight to the customized binary. Don't use the one that gets embedded with
plus one to that. Yeah, that's so true.
We've got a couple more questions coming in. Eldon asked, do you think that you'll keep using both Customized and Helmed indefinitely?
Yeah, the Helm chart is the abstraction, right? It's the thing that the developers understand. Customize is kind of like that cherry on top that means that they dry up their repositories. What it does is it keeps the diff or the PR small. And also, as well as that, it makes it very powerful. So if we want to make a change to all environments at one time, we change the base directory and it flows all the way through. The PR is tiny, but the outcome is massive. And they understand Helm charts. And honestly, we've made a small number of tweaks to the backend Helm chart. We never have to worry and talk to the developers now. They understand that chart so well that there's no reason for us to change it. And the Helm release is the thing that's actually getting deployed. They don't need to understand all of the details of, you know, what's the difference between a replica set and a deployment? They just need to understand this abstraction. They understand that values chart, and we all just move on. You know, we've given them training to understand that, but the whole thing for me and the team was, how do we make a platform that's self-service to the developers, right? We are a small platform team. They are a massive engineering team. If they are our customer, right? And our Mettle customers are really their customers. So we have to, you know, we have to listen and think about the engineers as our customers. And yeah, to your question, we're not going to move away from both, or Mettle. We're not going to move away from both. I'm actually leaving shortly, but I
have a question from me. How do you handle things like operators that aren't really, or resources that aren't like namespace scoped within this pattern?
So all resources that we deploy are deployed via the Gitops model. So if it's a kind of quote unquote cluster scoped resource, it will sit inside the Kubernetes resources module. Kubernetes resources repo, and it will be under the control of the platform team. So we have very strict RBAC policies. So depending upon what mission team you're in, depends what namespace you can deploy to, essentially. But cluster-wide resources sit with the platform engineering team. So that Kubernetes resources.
And follow up to that, do you like, is a pattern multi-tenant clusters, like multiple namespaces, multiple teams on per cluster, or is it like one team per cluster?
No, it's multi-tenant. So we have multiple products that have strict multi-tenancy requirements, essentially, but they live on the same platform. So the platform is generic to Mettle, and you know, you get your own namespace to work within.
Awesome. Thanks much, Steve, for coming and doing what is a very late night talk for you. I know. For those who don't know, Steve is in London, so it is almost 1 a.m. for you.
Let me check. Yeah, it's 1 minute to 1.
So you have our appreciation for making that sacrifice for us. There are
Alex and Joe are slave
questions.
drivers, man. Just making this guy stay up until 1, for God's sakes. Jeez.
It's Hustle City, man. Come on, it's Atlanta.
It's SIG late night virtual.
SIG late night. That's right. There are more questions coming in for you, Steve, in the chat. So I'll just leave those for you to answer there, since I think we're going to move on to our next speaker.
Sure, sounds good.
Thanks again, Steve.
No problem.
So, folks, we have got our next speaker now. If you have been in the DevOps space, quote unquote, or the Kubernetes community for any amount of time, you've heard this man's name. A trope you hear people say all the time is how great of a community we have. When I hear people say how good the community is, this is the guy I think of. And one of the people who drives that positivity and that love home all the time. Somebody who I'm very happy to call my friend. Mr. Marky Jackson is here to talk about Spinnaker, Jenkins, and Kubernetes, and building a steady ship to sail on. It's all yours, buddy.
Oh, wow. I'm not even sure. Steve did so much. I don't even think I'm going to do even close to that. So my hat's off to you, Steve. I'm not wearing a hat, but if I were, we'll just say hats off to you. That was awesome. There are a lot of people here. There are people here that I massively respect. So thank you so very, very much for being here. Steve, thank you so much for being up so late. I'm truly, truly thankful for everything that you did here, do in the community. My screen, and I'm gonna totally mess all of this up. Hopefully everybody.
Oh, there he is. Okay, you frozen us for a second, buddy. We see you though. We're actually seeing your Slack at the moment though, so I don't know if you want to.
Oh no, you're not supposed to see that. That's where I'm talking shit. I mean stuff. Bad things go on there.
There you go. We see the sliding it down, buddy.
Give me just a second to adjust my screen. I apologize. When you work with multiple monitors and. Alrighty. Now everybody can see my screen, the right screen, the video screen. Is that correct?
Yeah, looking good.
Awesome. So again, thank you everybody for taking the time to hear me ramble. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to talk today about Spinnaker, Jenkins, and Kubernetes, and I call it a sturdy ship ready to set sail. And that's because a lot of this is all nautical. For those that don't know me, I am a Kubernetes org member. I am a release lead associate. I also lead the Kubernetes mentoring sub-project off of the Contribex. I am a Jenkins core code maintainer. I'm a SIG lead. I do some other things. I'm a CDF ambassador, and I also help contribute to Spinnaker to the extensibility, which is known as the plugins. Okay, here's the agenda. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of Kubernetes, Jenkins, and Spinnaker. This I titled Anxiety. I'm then going to give you a demo. This I titled Tears. The Q&A, things start to get a little bit better, so we'll say a sigh of relief. And then closing, it's all time to party, and I'd like everybody to grab a bottle, water, whatever it is you got, and we'll cheers. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started on the high-level overview, which I titled Anxiety. So that's me. What could go wrong when you're trying to give a high-level overview? And my anxiety tells me, I'm glad you asked. So for everybody here, I'm sure you all know about Kubernetes, so I won't spend a lot of time on this high-level overview other than to say that some of the real core components of this are the control plane, the node components, various add-ons. There's a lot more to this, but this just covers it at a high level. Jenkins, high-level overview of Jenkins. For anybody that does not know what Jenkins is, when you hear the term CI/CD, Jenkins is the CI piece of that. It can also be the CD part of that, but in order for it to be continuous delivery, it has to use plugins, it has to use a lot of scripts, and that makes it a little bit difficult, but you can do it. It just requires a little bit of knowledge. Spinnaker, the high-level overview of Spinnaker. Spinnaker has three main things it looks at. It looks at application management, which are the applications, clusters, server groups, load balancers, firewalls. There's the application deployment, which is the pipelines, stages, and tasks. And then there's deployment strategies such as red, black, rolling red, black, and canary. I'm going to cover these a lot more in detail in the demo part, so I'm going to sort of fly through these pieces. I wanted to talk a little bit about terminology because some of the words that I've said previously in the Spinnaker high-level overview may sound familiar from Kubernetes, such as cluster. In Spinnaker, a cluster is not the same as a cluster in Kubernetes. If you were to tie it to something familiar in Kubernetes, it would be more like a deployment, and that's the logical server groups. Server groups in Spinnaker would be a workload in Kubernetes, things like artifacts, bus configurations, and CRDs. Think of Istio for custom builds. Your load balancers are going to be your services. In Spinnaker, load balances will be Kubernetes services. Your firewalls are your network policies. And the accounts in Spinnaker are your cluster credentials. Think your kube config or a service account. I get asked this quite often because I work in these three communities, so people think there's some war going on between those, and it's really not, because as I said about Jenkins versus Spinnaker is Jenkins is a CI tool, Spinnaker is a CD tool. Now you can do CD with Jenkins, and it does do powerful builds, but it doesn't allow you out-of-the-box deployment tools. In order to do the CD part, you have to use a lot of custom scripts, whether they're Groovy scripts or Python scripts or just Bash scripts. You have to use a lot of plugins to achieve that. Whereas in Spinnaker, for the CD part, it has resource integration out of the box. You directly use cloud APIs like AWS, GCP, IBM. There's fewer scripts, and there's no CI within Spinnaker. So really, when we think about, and the question that I get asked quite often is, well, which should I use, Jenkins or Spinnaker? Really, you're using both of them because you integrate the CI from Jenkins into the CD from Spinnaker. A lot of times I get asked, well, what about Kubernetes versus Spinnaker because it's a CD tool? Kubernetes doesn't do orchestration like Spinnaker does not do orchestration like Kubernetes does. So when we think of Kubernetes, the replica rollouts, they're slow, they're linear, and there's really no approval process in that. But with Spinnaker, you get a little bit more, such as a percentage rollout, faster rollbacks. You can actually lower your cost of infra because of that. And then there's also the approval part, which we call judgment. Demo time. I titled this one Tears because as Steve said, that hopefully the demo gods will be good to me and this will not actually break. So give me a second and I am going to queue up this demo. I'm going to pray. I have to move some things out of my way. Okay, so I've created here, what I'm going to show you is I have a repo. A friend and I keep a sort of accountability on getting exercise. And that is where we log when we walk or run and do these things. So we kept this. So this is going to be where we're going to actually set our Git webhook. This Git webhook will be right here. This is an actual Spinnaker UI. I've set up an application. I'm setting my username for GitHub and the repo, what branch I will be pulling from. I have a special user that I will be using. And we're going to be running this through multiple environments. So this environment will actually, let me take this out just a step so you can sort of see what this will look like. We're going to be going to all of these various environments by making one change to this file. Finally, what we're going to do is in this little area here, this is the job we're going to focus on now. I'm not going to focus on all the environments that I'm going to be deploying to, but I'm going to focus on this. So again, as I said earlier, Spinnaker is your CD tool, but it doesn't do CI. So what we have is we have our Jenkins. Jenkins actually does our CI. So I have a job here that I've created, which is going to run a test. If the test pass, it will actually come through all of these and start deploying to all of these environments. So I am going to, right on the fly, make a small little change here. Very small change. We're going to set up for tomorrow's, well, this is actually today's numbers. I won't put all of this in, and I'm just going to commit to this change. Now we're going to see, this is, again, this is actually going to, this runs a webhook that's always watching this repo. And if we come here, we should see, as you can see here, that change that I made has now kicked off this job. And we can see build number 540, which if we come to the Jenkins job, let's just refresh this and pray to God this works. Thank you, baby Jesus. You can see 540 is now running. So as I alluded to, what's going to happen with this particular job here is it's going to go through, run the test, and it's going to deploy to up here to dev. It will run a series of tests just to make sure it's good. If those tests pass, it will actually then go into staging. Now, let me bring up another screen here just to kind of show you what I've done. Are you able to see my terminal?
Yep.
Awesome. So here we have.
Could you Command plus it a couple times, buddy?
Yes, I did. Tell me you can see it.
We can see it, but it might help to scale it up a couple more.
I see what you're saying. Awesome. Can you see that better?
Yes, that'll work.
So here you can see I have Spinnaker running on this is actually running locally on my Mac. I've got my Jenkins, I've got my dev namespace, I've got my staging namespace, as well as my prod namespace. What's going to happen here is this is going to go through and run through all of my deployments in these environments. And you can now see that I actually have this running. Let me close this out and come back into our execution details. And we should see that this build was successful. And if we look at Jenkins and refresh, we'll see that this build was successful. And now it's going to continue running through all of the deployments. Now let's see what we actually did here. We ran an actual build from our repo that ran some tests. It started a staging deploy. It started a dev deploy and it ran some tests. These tests will continue running, and then they'll run the test suite, they verify, and what they're basically going to do is continue through into our prod deployment. Now, I'm not going to show you all of these because it takes like 24 minutes for this, and I realized that when I ran this test today, but you can actually see that the duration is still running because it's running the various tests into all of the environments. So let's go back over here. So that's kind of a high level of what we did. So we did the demo. So what did we do? Earlier we were talking about growing things and someone said they were growing, Alex, you said you were growing chilies, and I said, I got something in the slide. Here's that slide, spicy. So what did we do? We made changes to some code. A Git webhook initiated a Spinnaker test sequence in Jenkins. The test was successful, so we deployed to dev. We ran some more test sequences in dev via Jenkins, and those tests were successful, and we deployed to staging. We started the very same thing again in staging, and then we went on. But when we came to prod, one of the things that I did is I used a canary deployment. And this was a really awesome part of Spinnaker, is that I can set up a canary deployment to say, I only want 50% of my traffic, or I can send a change and only have 50% of the traffic go to where that change is. And the beauty of that is I can now limit a problem and for a wider customer base to be affected, and I can roll back to a successful previous version. After it's all done, we did a little dance, we drank a little water, and then the demo froze. So I came to this and I said, shout out to the sidewalks for keeping me off the streets. I'm never really good at demos and I always go through them super fast. I'm hoping there's a lot of questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I know there has to be a lot of questions, such as how do we set parameters up? How do you get artifacts in other areas like JFrog or Nexus? And I'm hoping that I'll be able to answer those questions. And I should be back and you can see me on the other screen.
Yeah, we can see you. So if folks that are on video, feel free to unmute, just ask questions, and attendees feel free to throw them into the Q&A box and we'll read them out.
So I got a question. Is it possible to, instead of use Jenkins, use something like GitHub Actions as a CI and then have GitHub Actions deliver a webhook to Spinnaker?
You can do that as well. So it does a lot of other plugins, and that's what the extensibility is. So you can use Circle CI, you can use a GitHub Action, you can use Drone, you can use all other different CI tools, not just Jenkins. There's Atlassian, they have a CI. You can use other things. And that's all, again, the cool part about it is it's out of the box, built. And there's notifications that you can set. When I talked about that judgment piece, the really cool part about that is, let's say, for example, I'm on a DevOps team and we're doing a release, but my boss wants to only approve the release because it's a big release. I can set that judgment to say, I want this to go to Slack in a channel, but only this user can use a special word to approve that. Or I can set it in Jira to say there's a Jira ticket and if somebody approves, you have that ability to set these manual judgments. The one thing that I've used recently for a large bank was they wanted SMS. So you can actually set up SMS out of the box with Spinnaker and say, I want to reply, only a certain phone number can reply a certain keyword to manually approve it. So that's like super cool. You can do Slack, email, all these various things. Hopefully that answered your question. Come on, give me more. Give me more.
So we ran Spinnaker and Jenkins, pretty much this setup for a while. This was a little while ago. I think we had is it Armory that has their own distribution of Spinnaker?
Yes.
Because we wanted some of the like SAML login things and stuff like that, or maybe it was OIDC. But do you have any recommendations about like backing up pipelines? Because we were like, you know, you can go in and kind of create a pipeline in the UI, but then if you're going to go start a new project, kind of like Steve's, does that mean you're creating all of that via the UI, or are you using some kind of configuration that you're checking in to Git?
So there is the Gitops part, so you can set your configuration via YAML in Git. So that's a very nice piece to it. As far as backing things up, or a question that I get asked quite often is, what if I want to take my Jenkins pipeline and start to abstract that into Spinnaker? So that's not available outside of the box. I can tell you that for the company that I work for, OpsMX, we do have it's called Open Enterprise Spinnaker, and we do have that functionality there. To my knowledge, we are the only ones that allow you to export, and we write a special exporter that will let you export that out. But yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel to do things. You can take your existing CI and sort of move that in as a stage into Spinnaker.
How is this resilient? Like you have an orchestrator that's handling a lot of the, it's basically creating like a serial process and managing that serial process across perhaps multiple Jenkinses and all of these things. But what keeps that central orchestration piece from being the problem when things go weird?
Yeah, so what you want to do, now we come to sort of an architectural talk. When you set this up, you want to have some type of resiliency in your Spinnaker. So the main piece, like the Halyard CLI, which keeps all of your configs, you definitely want to have that backed up or have a failover, which allows you the ability, Spinnaker out of the box allows you that ability to do. So there's a lot of tools, like there's some companies out there that try to do what Spinnaker's doing and they don't open source it. Spinnaker is a tool, if you think about it, in 2014, I believe, Netflix came out with Spinnaker. And if we all know about Netflix and chill, the cool thing was it needed the ability to send all of these large video streams and create new environments. And that's really what Spinnaker did. It's integrated with all of the major cloud providers, so AWS, GCP, and they do a lot of work in the community to keep things up to date and add new features to that.
Michael Lane asks in Q&A, how do you recommend backing it up? I'm not sure what component he means by it there. But.
So if you're talking about Spinnaker in general, backing it up, if you have a Git operation, you can use Gitops to do that backup. You check everything into Git, including the Halyard configuration. That's one piece. There's a lot of tools out there like Valero. You can also use that. That will allow you to do a massive backup of the cluster. Ideally, what you're doing is you're running this in a Kubernetes cluster. So if you're backing up your Kubernetes cluster, super easy. You do not have to run this in Kubernetes. You could run this on native EC2, but it's just nicer to run it on Kubernetes, I have found. And I find most organizations that I've had talked with in the last 2 to 3 months don't want to use native like AWS. They really want to have this in Kubernetes or AKS or something like that. EKS, excuse me.
Awesome talk, Marky. Thank you so much for doing it. Quick question. So what are your best practices around protecting things like AWS secret and access keys when you're doing deployments to different environments? Any thoughts on that? It's always a tricky thing to get right.
It allows for the use of KMS AWS secrets. You can actually integrate that. Another really cool thing is if you already have, let's say you have an AWS environment and you're using IAMS profiles, you can actually integrate that right into Spinnaker. So it's cool because you can actually, if you want to allow devs to only, let's say you give the ability for a dev team to only access a certain set of EC2s. You don't have to write a certain large IAMS profile to lock them down. You actually can set that in RBAC via Spinnaker, which is a really cool thing because it sort of takes that abstraction away from AWS and all of the JSON that they have, CloudFormation.
Marky, it's been a while since I've used Jenkins in and around Kubernetes, and I know one of the things that early on that kept coming up that was kind of a thorn in my side at that point in time was like running jobs that needed to do actions on like with a Docker daemon itself. Is there anything that's been like any enhancements that have come along that make that a little bit easier, whether it's building a container image within you know, CI, or say I want to run something like a kind Kubernetes and Docker cluster or something like that?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of updates on the Jenkins side to allow the Docker daemon to work, and I believe the version that you need to use, I'm trying to think of the name of the tool, but there's a tool that you actually use that's in part of the core code. And if you're using it, I believe it's 1.13 will let you run the Docker daemon. A lot of other side tools are being used. Like there is something called the JTE, the Jenkins templating engine, which is run out of Booz Allen Hamilton. Phenomenal tool. And if you ever get a chance to check that out, like templating what you want to do, especially for Docker stuff, it's absolutely amazing. That's written by a gentleman named Steven Turina, who's a dear friend of mine. Great tool.
Spoiler alert, Steven's speaking next month.
We're speaking together. So,
See how I rolled that in?
There's not planned, everyone. Not planned at all.
Not planned at all. Not planned at all. I'm a huge fan of Steven Turina and the Booz Allen Hamilton team. They do a lot of work, especially in the Jenkins community. So if you get a chance to check out the Jenkins templating engine, the documentation is phenomenal. But that allows for a lot of what you're asking in terms of like setting how you want to do jobs and really abstracting. What you'll find, and I'm sure everybody can attest to this, if you go into an organization and you start to look at their Jenkins setup, you'll see that one team, you know, let's say your front end team is doing their jobs one way and the back end team is doing it another way. The DevOps team is doing another way. But really, if you start to drill down into what they're doing, you see some commonalities, and that kills a lot of things. But with one of the cool things with Spinnaker and with the Jenkins templating engine, you can start to create these reusable libraries that now, you know, if somebody said, like one of the ones I've seen is a lot of times you'll see in enterprises or environments, they'll use Slack. So they don't want to use the Slack plugin in Jenkins. So they'll write their own custom script. And you'll see that it's usually badly written. 3 different teams write it differently. There's no commonality. And then when something breaks, the DevOps team has to own it. And you're like, but I didn't write this. Like I didn't write this. These type of tools such as Spinnaker and the ability to use Jenkins within Spinnaker and the Jenkins templating engine, this allows you to create reusable libraries. So basically, when a team comes to you and says, we want to do A, and you say, okay, what is the commonalities of A? Oh, you need Slack? You're going to use this library. And this library allows you parameterized entries such as what channel you want, what color you want, what do you want to plug it into? Those are the only options you get. But the large code base that remains dormant and will never get touched unless DevOps gets to update it, you don't touch. And that's really a beauty, because at the end of the day, if something goes pear-shaped, you're getting the on-call and you didn't build the job. So this takes a lot of that away. So there's a lot of different cost-saving mechanisms here.
We have a question in chat. Raj asks, how is support for Spinnaker on Google Cloud?
It is actually very good. Google is, so when Spinnaker donated the project to the CDF, which is the Continuous Delivery Foundation, it was a joint donation from Netflix and Google. So they have a lot of support in there. And you can go to spinnaker.io. The documentation is really good. It'll walk you through how to, basic setups. And the Jenkins setup, if anybody's looking to play with this, it's really super easy. I will drop a little note here and say that OpsMX will be releasing very soon a kind local development tool for Spinnaker. That's currently what I'm running. So the way I just did this demo for you is not in the cloud. This is run on a 16 gig Mac with like 8 gigs of RAM, and I can run a lot of various jobs on it. We're using kind.
I see an anonymous question posted in Q&A, which I think is posted a little tongue-in-cheek, but I'm going to read out loud because I think a lot of people share this sentiment. It says, I have a question. So is Kubernetes going to become a programming language in the future? Because it feels like with this much abstraction, it almost feels like a new language.
Isn't it YAML-based? Isn't YAML our new language? Yet another markup language? I'd love to know who said that.
Sebastian YAML.
Right? So the idea about using Spinnaker and using Jenkins is when you deploy something and you need to go to prod, you want to go there with confidence. When you screw something up and it happens to everybody, you want to be able to roll back to a very good known version. If you want to use canary deployments and not affect your entire customer base for something that may go wrong, you have that ability out of the box. Jenkins is a great tool as CI. It also does CD, but you have to, you need to know about what plugins that you want to use. You need to know about how, if you're going to write Groovy, you're going to need to know about Groovy. So there are some complexities to do that. It does work, but you're going to need a little help to do that. I worked for a company where I can tell you previously that Jenkins was a pain point. And because it was a pain point, a lot of times deployments were, they were very tense. And I wish at the time we would have adopted Spinnaker faster to get through some of these pain points, because the idea is your developers have a mindset. And the mindset is they want to write their feature because that's what their sprint entails. They don't really care about the underlying platform. They just assume it should work. And as DevOps or an operations team, this gives the ability, these tools when used correctly and in conjunction with one another, give the ability to give that level of comfort to the developers so they can be, more fruitful. One of the awesome things that I like about Spinnaker is auditing. I worked at a company where we used, prior to using Spinnaker, there was no accountability. And a lot of times the sword fell on the DevOps team. Something breaks, if the platform is wrong, it's the DevOps team. Never once did we say, well, they deployed bad code, or never did it get looked at that. The DevOps team always knew, and I'm not trying to call out programmers, I'm a software developer by trade. But a lot of times the DevOps team is out of that value stream, but they're blamed for everything. Spinnaker offers out of the box audit trails. Now the audit trails go so deep as to say, how many times did this deploy? And essentially think of a git blame to say, Bill, what are you doing, man? This is your 12th failed deploy that's killed production. And I keep getting the call. So it becomes a really rich tool for, the C-suite when they want to understand why the product is not getting released fast enough, or where the failures are during an outage, or, post-mortem. Now, I know that they're supposed to be blameless, but at some point you need to be able to call out where. And Spinnaker right out of the box gives you that ability to say, hey, it was our environment that was screwed up. We own that and we need to fix that. Or, Jane, what's going on here?
Poor Bill.
Poor Bill.
We've got another question in the chat here. Rashad asks, how does this setup differ from a harness?
I might have to, hold on, I got to think about that one for a second. So here's This is Spinnaker's an open source tool, and Harness is not. Harness will be working on some open source stuff with their recent acquisition of Drone, but Harness is a closed source tool. They're a great company. I've looked at their product. It's a great team and solid, but it's not an open source tool. So that's the main difference right there. If you are in an organization that wants to try something and not have vendor lock-in, you're going to want to go to open source. You're going to want to try that in your dev environment, or you're going to do a POC. Oh, sorry, I saw somebody saying. You know, so you don't get that with Harness. And
Yeah,
pricing is strange.
With other cloud tools and also like integrations with modern tools as well. I've played with their software a lot. So I mean, some of the things that they have are like I said, is they're more locked into a commercial kind of mindset versus having a more open for you to create kind of those integration points. It's a very, very cool tool though.
It's a great tool. What basically is it's a play off of Spinnaker. It's exactly what it is. But the various out of the box items that Spinnaker offers, such as integration with Sysdig or other monitoring tools or various artifact repositories, comes out of the box, and you don't have to pay for that, or you don't have I've heard of some instances where there's a per pod pricing. And if you think about this, and if I'm thinking about my cube system, why am I paying for those pods if I'm not worried about them in terms of, you know, Spinnaker? You know, so those are some concerns. I'm not going to down them. I don't work for them, or it's not open source.
Hey, Marky, I'll ask the big question of the night. So my biggest problem, you know, dealing with all our CI/CD pipelines and all the associated tooling is that monthly Jenkins, GitLab, the other tooling upgrades. What are your thoughts on plugins? It seems like, you know, every month, you know, we got a new plugin that comes, a new one that goes, but it seems like they're getting orphaned at a higher rate. And I don't know if that's because there's such a huge ecosystem for CI/CD right now. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So I'm going to speak from the Jenkins perspective because I'm part of the core team on that for the open source side. It's open source, and with any open source, somebody will write code for a given thing for their need, but that's not their day job, and things are going to often get orphaned, and there's going to be, you know, updates, and they're not going to stay up with things, and it does happen. There is a how do I say this the right way? When you're choosing what you want to use in your environment, I have a way that I'm a plugin maintainer. So I maintain the Kubernetes plugin, the Prometheus plugin, GitLab, many other plugins. If I had the ability, and for those that know, I worked at Sysdig, I was anti-plugin. And I was anti-plugin because I knew what was at stake if something like you just described went wrong. So I always chose to go for the code perspective, such as thinking about running the Docker daemon. I did not run native Docker daemon in Jenkins because if something happened with there's a core plugin that I cannot think of off the top of my head, but in the 1.11 version of this plugin, it completely broke Docker in Jenkins. So you could not run that daemon. And everybody had to now resort to not allowing Jenkins to do the underlying Docker commands. You had to write that in your pipeline code. So I looked at that as saying, for a company where I'm going to be the one that's on call or I have to answer to somebody, I don't want to trust a plugin. With that being said, from the plugin side, as far as Jenkins is concerned, we do recognize as a project that there are a lot of orphan plugins. We're going through those plugins, and a lot of the core members are now taking that, whatever plugin it is. For example, GitLab got orphaned. And who's now the GitLab maintainer for Jenkins GitLab plugin? Me. And so we're doing that because we recognize that certain plugins need to continue, even if the person or company that decided to write that no longer wants to keep up with that. but that's kind of what your dedication to the open source world is in the open source project. You don't look at it like, what the hell, this company A is not even doing this anymore, you know? And then you see their marketing team calling you out or something. I've got lots of stories about that. So we're hoping that that gets better. I will say on the Jenkins side, there is a new roadmap that came out at the beginning of this year that was put out by the board for Jenkins, and it's to address some of these things. So we stay on top of them. We do know that when there's a security vulnerability, if it's for a plugin that's been orphaned, one of the core members will pick that up and actually fix that vulnerability. As far as vulnerabilities in Jenkins as a core, when that comes out, I often say it's nice that we're doing something if it comes out once a week or once a month, because it means we're staying up on it as opposed to letting a vulnerability languish for a few months. And you, the consumers of the open source project, get screwed. So I'd rather have multiple CVE fixes than not have them at all. That being said, we can write better code and do better, and we're trying.
Huge thanks, man. I really appreciate all your hard work. That's awesome.
I get asked why I like open source so much, and I'll be honest, for those that don't know or read anything about me, I like open source because it's the people that are sitting on the screens and the ones that are not on the screen. These are the people that some of you I haven't even met, but I have conversations and I just like, these are my friends. There's no special handshake. There's no, you know, we don't get motorcycle jackets, which I really wish we did, but can't have.
You don't have the jacket?
Yet.
There's jackets?
Are we all getting back?
Somebody get Marky a jacket over here.
Somebody give me.
I'll do it.
We were supposed to do that in San Diego. I know that that was a large talk. But I'll be honest with you. It's when you're in an open source project, when you can think about the people that we see online all the time, or you see them in Slack, and they want to learn something. And you take that small moment, it means really nothing, but you take that small moment and you give them some time and you watch the reaction. I could live for a lifetime just watching somebody just be stoked and know that I had that ability to leave a small legacy in a project, that when that person goes to somebody else and they're just like, yeah, this guy Marky, this guy was so goddamn weird, but he was so nice. And then they do that to somebody else. That's my legacy.
Just listen to Lucky's podcast with Dan.
Yeah,
that resonates a lot.
I had breadsticks when that happened, by the way. No joke. I posted a picture of it. 3 dozen.
Yeah.
Love those breadsticks.
So I think that's a perfect place for us to wind down the official portion of the meetup, but by no means does that mean everybody has to go. We will do our closing out stuff, and then we'll switch everybody over to where everybody's a panelist, so everybody can have video and audio, and we can hang out with your favorite beverage of choice and continue the discussions. But wanted to go ahead and say again, huge thank you to both Steve and Marky. You guys did not disappoint, not that there was any, even doubt in anybody's mind, I don't think. Thank you so much for coming, dropping some knowledge on our Atlanta community, and our first international broadcast here, I think. So big milestone for us as well. Thanks to everybody else that came out to see this, our community. We don't have anything without you guys here. That being said, I'm gonna do, throw this out there. We always request if there's any topic that you guys would like to hear covered within our meetups, please reach out. katesatl@gmail.com. We have our GitHub repository. I posted links in the chat. Feel free to open up an issue to suggest a topic, a specific speaker, or whatever else. We love it when our community members do talks as well. So if you have an idea, no matter how big or small it is, reach out to us. We can help you get your presentation together if you need help, or we can help pair you up with somebody else in the community at large to do some like co-presenting and such. So please reach out. That being said, I'll turn over to Alex real quick.
Yeah. So final piece of bookkeeping. Next month's meetup is September 30th. We have Mr. Dan Papandreas himself right here on the meetup, come to speak with Steve Tirana. Did I pronounce that right? From Booz Allen, as Marky called out earlier, little spoiler alert I let drop earlier, along with Tim Dorr, one of our local community members, a brilliant guy out of Spaceship, coming to talk about cloud native build packs. So that's going to be a great one too. Make sure to come join us next month too, folks. All right. Thanks, everybody.